climate change could create a situation
where we have to
rethink.
We have to rethink this. Yeah,
how much we're cutting and stuff. That could happen.
Right? Yeah. And at this point, we don't have the ability really, or we're still really early in developing our ability to forecast what the implications are.
No, it's tough.
Change.
It's
really
real tough.
Yeah.
And it's hard to start planning silviculture around what the climate's gonna be like.
Yeah, that's right.
We don't know what's gonna happen. We can model
we can model some expected scenarios, but nature will probably hit us with some surprises.
I'm sure there'll be a couple.
So we have to be cautious.
Hey guys, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. I'm Matthew Christoph. On this podcast, we talk about the environment and the science of sustainability. So today's episode is one with Phil Comeau. Phil Comeau is he was a professor at the University of Alberta. He's semi-retired now, but he's still doing a lot of work, still involved with a lot of research and that kind of stuff. And he's been there a long time. He's been involved in dozens and dozens of studies regarding silviculture. Silviculture being growing back the forest. How do we grow back the forest, regenerate the forest, right? And he actually taught me when I was in school, and he's a very, very knowledgeable guy. Very, very thoughtful. He's really... he wants to make sure that everything he says is correct, and he doesn't want to mislead anybody. He's very good at understanding the implications of what he's saying. So I really appreciate having his perspective. He's one of the best, I would say, academics in this field, when it comes to forest regeneration out there. And he's really worth listening to. He knows his stuff a lot. And so I wanted to bring him on to talk about how we reforest after harvesting. And for a lot of measurements, we do a great job of it right now, but there's a lot of arguments that we could be doing it better. We could be doing it differently. And so we wanted to bring him on to talk about that, to talk about how we can start to move our forest regeneration or harvest, our cutblock regeneration away from the way we do it now, which is if we cut something down, that's what we put back on the landscape, into something that is more related to forest succession. So the first half an hour, we talked about how the boreal forest, the natural succession of the boreal forest, and past ways of regenerating cutblocks. And then at about 35 minutes, I think, or something like that, we get into how we can start to do things differently and why that would be good and the benefits to that and the challenges to that. And it was great. It was a really awesome conversation. So I hope you guys like it. Phil's a great guy. I'm so thankful I managed to get him to come on. So hope you guys like it. And just quickly, we're going to talk about sponsors for this episode. The most important sponsor being West Fraser. West Fraser's funds have been made available through the Forest Resource Improvement Association of Alberta, and I couldn't be more grateful for their support. So thank you very much. And secondary sponsors are Greenlink Forestry and Damage Timber Apparel. You go to damagetimber.com and get 10% off anything you buy just by putting Your Forest 10 in at checkout. They sell all kinds of different clothes and hats and stuff. Really cool stuff. I love their hats. They're the best. And they support environmental sciences through the sale of their clothing. So 10% of everything they sell goes towards a scholarship for environmental sciences students. So check them out. And without any further messing around, let's get into it, talking about forest regeneration and and how we can do it better with Phil Comeau. Here we go. So why don't we just start out just talking about, I guess, like, we know each other through the university. You taught me 10 or 12 years ago.
A while ago. Yeah.
And a little bit of work here and there since then. But I never found out, how did you get into kind of environmental sciences? Like what's behind that passion for wanting to make sure we have a sustainable everything, you know?
I guess as a kid and growing up, my dad we were outside. He liked fishing too, so we were out salmon fishing on the West Coast.
Oh, nice.
Quite a lot on weekends. He liked the outdoors. He dabbled in forestry work, doing stuff. here and there. Yeah, and then in my teens, through Scouts, I got really interested in being outdoors and gained an appreciation for the environment and the forests on Vancouver Island and stuff. So, yeah, and it just kind of then I did an undergraduate degree in biology, which got me into ecology, sort of focused on plant ecology, and then and then summer jobs in forestry.
Oh, nice.
First ones through family, friends, connections, and and then that sort of went,
so your whole life
from there.
Just kind of inundated in the natural world.
Yeah, in the natural world and forest. I grew up in the city, but wasn't in very close to the bush. Although there's a nice patch of Douglas fir forest.
It's a pretty good patch
not far behind my house, in a park that's fortunately still there.
Nice.
So after university, I got jobs in forestry, and then went back to school. To get a graduate degree.
And fell into silviculture.
And my PhD was in ecology, but it was fairly applied. So and that morphed into silviculture.
Yeah. Oh, it makes sense. Sweet. No, it's cool. I just like to get the feel for everyone. So that some people you find they grew up in the city and they just kind of stumbled across forestry or whatever it was, right? So it's I just wanted
or decided to get out of the city.
Exactly. So I guess to get into it, I want to start talking about. So try to set the scene for this conversation because there'll be lots of people listening that'll be like silviculturists that'll be totally in the know and they'll understand what you're talking about. But just to set the scene for people who might not, understand all the jargon and everything, let's set the scene for how we do silviculture now. So let's first we'll start talking about, because this podcast is about natural succession and getting forests or getting cutblock regeneration to kind of that state and the arguments for or against it. So let's set the scene talking about natural succession in the Boreal forest. So like the mixed wood situation. What does that look like? And then we'll go from there.
Okay, so what's happened historically in nature, forests reburn areas in the boreal mixed woods fairly frequently. Frequently meaning like 50 to 100 years. More in most areas closer to 50. Naturally, some of them human caused, influenced by First Nations activities and stuff. So then changes, and of course some years like now were worse than others, and fires would burn vast areas sometimes and small areas others.
For sure,
going with the weather, depending on how the weather is each year, how the climate is long term. So we saw that in Alberta this year, some fires to begin with in the spring, and then summer came and it rained and very few fires. So,
totally.
But some summers a couple of years ago, super dry and explosive fire situations all summer. So quite a range in when fires occur and their size and their characteristics. But after fire, trees, vegetation and trees regrow. It's a process that's called succession. So there's stuff left behind. There's patches of even living, standing trees that don't get aren't taken out by the fire, aren't killed by the fire. But there's also, even in the soil, there's seeds and roots of things like trees like aspen, which regenerates from its roots most commonly. So a lot of aspen regeneration comes up from buds on the roots. They're called suckers. And they become trees very, very quickly. Aspen grows very fast. So after fire, if there was any aspen around, it's there pretty quickly. That the following spring, you have 50 centimeter tall aspen come up there pretty quick. So by the end of summer, and sometimes you can have 2 and 3 meter tall aspen.
I was going to say I've seen some this year from some fires that they're 3.5 meters tall already. They've only been growing for 3 months. So it's totally depending on the site, obviously.
Grow really fast. So along with the aspen, if there's any pine around, pine cones can survive fire to some extent, and that the heat opens up the pine cones and seed is released. And then there's, after a fire, the ground surface is usually pretty good for seed to germinate and grow and develop into a pine tree. So there's can be some pine trees around, but most times we have spruce as a major component in the mixed-wood forest. So spruce, the seed is any seed that's on the ground is probably not going to grow. It's not viable for very long after it falls off the tree. So it'd be a little bit of germination. Most of it's fried in the fire, killed in the fire. So, but spruce does regenerate. We see lots of examples of that out there. So these mixed wood forests are mixtures of aspen and spruce. So, so the spruce got there somehow, and the way it got there was any spruce trees that are left standing that are old enough to produce seed and big enough to produce seed. Then the seed falls out of the cones in the fall. When the cones ripen, then it gets distributed around the trees. So most of the seed falls fairly close to the spruce. So most of it's within 10 to 30 meters of the spruce. But you can get a fair amount of seed up to about 100 meters or so. And then it diminishes pretty quickly. So the closer you are to the spruce tree, the more seed. The further away, less seed. So. So if there's enough spruce around, either outside the fire or in patches inside the fire, then there's a source of seed that falls to the ground. And if those seed hit a place that's not covered in vegetation, then that's a place where they can grow, then the seed germinates. Spruce seedlings can develop. And they grow very slowly. The first year, barely a centimeter. The second year, a little more. They grow their growth rate goes exponentially if they're in the open. But you start with a tiny seedling, even double that. It's only 2 centimeters. So by age 5. They're probably only 10 centimeters at most tall. They're going to be 30 years old before they're a meter tall, 20 to 30 years old.
That's the natural succession.
Get to a meter tall. So natural succession. So it takes then, over time. Spruce survives well underneath even a fair amount of aspen. And over time.
So we call a shade tolerant species.
Yeah, it's called a shade tolerant species. Moderately shade tolerant. Aspen doesn't like growing in shade. It's an intolerant species.
Same as pine, right? Shade intolerant.
It's also
needs open sun to do well.
Right. Yeah. So given time without a fire, then over time the spruce grows up underneath. More and more spruce can come in. Spruce regenerates over an extended period of time underneath the aspen. Provided there's suitable ground for the spruce to regenerate. If there's a lot of vegetation like grass, nothing else is going to establish as long as the grass is there.
So the grass basically just is out competing any of the spruce that might try to germinate. It basically, it shades everything, makes it cold, dark, and damp on the ground. So it's just not a good place for a spruce to grow. So you've got basically, right after a fire, you've got aspen growing up really fast and spruce growing really, really slow. And that's that's the natural succession.
That's the natural succession. At age maybe about eight, somewhere around 70 to 100 years, some of the spruce start poking up. They've grown long enough, they start getting taller and bigger than the aspen.
So there's a place like the aspen basically gets to a point where it kind of caps out, starts to put on more girth, less height, and then the spruce starts to catch up.
And then the spruce catches up and starts passing the aspen. As the spruce passed the aspen also isn't very decay resistant. So at about somewhere around age 60, we start seeing more and more aspen with stem rots decay. They start losing vigor, some of them. Sometimes they can live a long time, but some of them start going out. So, and then as the spruce gets taller, then the aspen, as we said earlier, is shade intolerant. So the shade from the spruce reduces the vigor of that aspen even more, and we see more and more aspen disappearing. So they start to fall out of the stand, fall over, and And given long enough, 150 years, the area can become, if there's enough spruce there, can become a spruce stand.
Just all
for
spruce,
all intents
no
and
aspen.
purposes, with very little aspen.
And with the spruce, as the spruce is growing up, they're still letting out seeds and getting, so you got all kinds of, so by the time a stand is 150 years old and it's all spruce, you've got multi-generations of spruce.
That's right.
All the way from 10 centimeters
little
tall up to 30 meters tall.
Yeah,
and they're all just kind of in there growing like crazy.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So it can
which is also, serendipitously enough, the perfect ladder fuel and situation for a fire to come through and burn it out again.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So we get a hot, dry summer or a few hot, dry summers, and it's explosive. Yeah.
So, I guess so basically we have a situation where we have a fire comes through, aspen comes up fast and quick, kind of outcompetes anything else, and the spruce will slowly start to come in over time. And then by the time the aspen's about 60 or 80 years old, the spruce starts to catch up, and then an aspen forest turns into a mixedwood forest, meaning that we have aspen and spruce in the same overstory canopy, and then double that time again, and you just got basically a conifer forest. And that's natural succession. In a general speaking for an aspen spruce stand. And so this is where the conversation comes in around around harvesting and how and our current situation around harvesting and how we regenerate forests. So currently, and just cut me off whenever, right? And I'm trying to explain it to people that don't know,
without a forestry background.
So currently, right now, if we come in at that 80 or 90 year mark where we have a mixedwood forest, we've got maybe 70% of it's aspen, 30% of it's spruce, and we've still got a bunch of understory spruce in there. Historically, like 20 years ago or whatever, we would come in, we would cut all that down, and then we would be historically obligated to have that same type of forest grow back. So that's in an attempt to try and maintain the mosaic on the landscape and not create a situation where we have all aspen coming back or all spruce coming back, and we have a homogeneous situation. So this is to try and maintain that dynamic, right? And so the problem with that is that if we cut down a conifer forest and there's aspen all around it, the conifer gets removed and the aspen, the suckers are still there. They pop up like crazy, and we have to work really, really, really hard
to make it into a conifer forest, a spruce forest,
right? Which is where the herbicide comes in and the other things like that.
Or something. If the desire is to make it a spruce forest right away, at the get go, then you have to invest in something to reduce the aspen substantially. And herbicide is the most cost-effective way to do it. And deals with problems with access fairly well. Whereas there are other options that cost more.
For sure.
That are out there.
There's other things you can do, and that's just
there's lots of things you can do. And it's been a challenge for industry to figure out how to efficiently regenerate those mixed wood stands. Early on, so number of options that have been tried. One something was common for a while, and I hope I'm not sure where that's at these days, but pretty common because it's easy. If you had a mix of a stand that was a 50-50 mix, say, or a 30-50 mix, if it was 30% spruce, 70% aspen, 70% aspen, you would take that block and a third of it, you would remove the aspen, probably with herbicide, to give yourself the 30% spruce, and the other 70%, you'd have aspen. You might have planted spruce there too, underneath for safety or as backup. And then you would just leave it. Of course, the fallback, or even without herbicides, and the option would be to plant spruce and let it go. But that's not a common practice because of the cost of planting spruce. You're you're going to have to let that spruce grow much longer than you would if you had spruce without aspen. So
right.
Yeah, probably going to have to let it grow almost twice as long,
right,
before it's merchantable size.
So basically, just to clarify what you're saying, is just that they may plant spruce and allow the aspen to come up with it.
Yeah.
And if they plant spruce, the seedlings are often hardy enough to survive the grass and the snow, and they manage to. So you're basically giving the spruce a head start.
Yeah, right.
On natural succession.
Yeah, natural succession. So you got a 25-30 centimeter tree there. Yeah.
But in that situation, the rotation might get longer because it takes. Instead of cutting it at 80 years, the spruce still isn't mature enough.
Still not going to be big enough because the aspen's going to slow. The aspen slows up the growth rate of the spruce,
of course,
as long as there's enough of it overtopping the spruce. Which, if you haven't done anything, there'll be plenty of aspen most times.
For sure. Okay, so
So common practice, if you're spending $600,000 to plant that spruce, would be to do something to make sure it grows well. And
right.
Herbicide treatment, maybe on 30% of the block, if it was a 30% spruce stand that you wanted to create, might be something that would be done. And that's
knowing that
it's been pretty common practice.
Right.
Yeah.
And to be clear, just so people know, the herbicide, although it kills the aspen and the grass, that's above ground there. It doesn't kill the root system of the aspen trees. It doesn't kill. It doesn't kill out any kind of regeneration ever. It's going to take.
Yeah, and it doesn't harm the spruce at the rates that are used for forestry. So it can be sprayed right over spruce. It's done at an appropriate time.
So if you sprayed right over spruce, you can still have, in 10 or 15 years, you can have aspen still
You'll have some
back.
aspen.
Okay.
Yeah. Although, I constantly have this discussion with people.
Sure.
Although there are there can be 1,000 aspen or a little more than that coming up. They usually don't grow very well. So,
okay.
If it's a place that was actually hit with herbicide.
Okay.
I would suggest you can't count on them.
Gotcha.
It's providing that. So there'll be aspen there. There'll be live aspen root systems there.
Okay.
So there'll always be the potential for more aspen regeneration. But if something happened, say a fire went through,
and to fix that problem, we see all kinds of weird herbicide spraying where it's like herbicide in patches.
Yeah, right.
And they have herbicide. So there's all kinds of different methods.
Yeah, there's all kinds of ways to sort of create different patterns. You could spray the herbicide in strips.
Right.
Maybe at 12, 15 meters wide. The spray swath is usually about somewhere between 10 and 15 meters. So that you could put strips through the forest, and there are systems out there for creating patches, treating 10 meter by 10 meter patches, and leaving untreated areas around it. So there's aspen around. And that's all kind of based on what sometimes happens even when people tried to herbicide an entire spruce plantation. Navigational control on the helicopter wasn't perfect. It's getting better now with GPS guidance. But there would be strips and patches left behind even under those situations.
Gotcha.
So you can actually, that can be done.
Right.
To leave patches of aspen that aren't herbicided. So,
okay.
Yeah, and the herbicide that's used, Vision, called glyphosate. Doesn't translocate very far through the root systems. It doesn't translocate and doesn't move in the soil, so it doesn't kill roots. It has to hit the leaves of the aspen,
right, to
kill some of them, to suppress them. So, so you get a knife edge at the edge of your treatment area, so it doesn't cross that boundary.
Right. And like we said, the whole point of this is to try to not have a conversion of land from like a mixedwood area into a pure deciduous area.
Yeah, right.
Because that's going to cause problems for habitat and all kinds of reasons.
Yeah. Well, and if we're not careful with managing these spruce dominated mixtures or the spruce component of the blocks, we can convert the landscape fairly quickly to aspen.
Yeah,
aspen-dominated forests, largely because we don't, in managed forests aren't allowed to get to be 150 years old. So we don't allow, succession isn't allowed to go to that end point.
Good point.
Most companies want to harvest within 100 years to recoup the investment. So that's kind of the planning. So if we went to 150 years, the provincial government and the industry would have to recalculate the conifer timber supply. So it would
change the whole system.
It would change the whole system. We'd probably have to shut. If we did that, we'd probably have to shut. Might have to shut down some mills unless we
probably quite a few,
and put some people out of work. Yeah. So
So
unless we find ways to keep that going. Yeah.
And so that's a good way. I like. We've managed to set up the natural succession and what's done historically. And this is just a drive-by of all that. Obviously, there's way more that goes into it, and you know that.
A couple terms of coursework at the university.
Right? Yeah, no kidding. So, but we got the gist of the issue.
Yeah.
So
it just maybe before we go too far, a little more context. So the Boreal, the central mixedwood subregion, the Boreal mixedwood forest, the forest itself is a mix of stuff. So as well as having these mixedwood stands, you got this landscape with patches. It's a mosaic of all. Ranging from pure aspen to pure spruce with mixedwoods in between. On the upper areas, the non-wet ground, which is muskeg, peat bogs and fens. The upland forest on this upland area. Probably usually through the mixedwoods, it's over half mixtures with a range of composition. So from only a little bit of spruce to a lot of spruce.
I can tell you that
so we got this diverse structure, and it provides really important habitat. So a lot of migratory songbirds like certain conditions. It seems the mixtures it does provide kind of the ideal condition for most most migratory songbirds. Is that it provides both the spruce and the aspen and the cover and the structure. They've got this height structure with spruce trees that are different sizes that provides nice nesting habitat and feeding and food sources and stuff. So it's attractive.
Right.
It's pretty. And so for a person like me who appreciates forests, I really enjoyed I really enjoy working in older mixedwood forests. They're neat.
They're fun.
They're fun. So for biodiversity, having a diversity of stands and types and this mix is really, really desirable. So that's something that has been recognized for a long time by industry and government, that we have to maintain that composition in the landscape.
Yeah, and I can say from my anecdotal perspective of doing inventory. So I've looked at, I don't know how much of Alberta's forest covered, but I would say probably personally looked at 35% of it or something, right? And I can tell you that there's not a whole lot of pure aspen stands anywhere. There are some. That does happen. It does happen, but there's not a lot of it. There's almost always a spruce understory of some degree. It might be very light, but it's there.
Right. Yeah.
So technically speaking, there's a lot of mixed wood.
Right.
More mixed wood probably than any other type of stand in the Boreal.
Yeah.
And so to try to grow this back is what we're trying to do. So I want to talk about some of the. I want to talk about the natural succession. So we're starting to see people want to start seeing forestry going in a natural succession, or they want to start hearing arguments for that. Well, how can we do that? A lot of that I find is driven by public perception of herbicide and wanting to get away from it. And there are, even though the herbicide's not dangerous, there are reasons to get away from it. For example, it kills when it kills the grass and it kills the aspen, it also kills out any of the shrub. So any of the berry producing. So a lot of indigenous groups really don't like it for that reason, as well as certain animals have problems with it. And so there's totally legitimate reasons to get away from herbicide, even though it's not technically dangerous to the landscape, right?
And just the simple controversy. And we've got to recognize, there are people, just like there are vegans who don't eat meat. There are people who are organic gardeners. Heck, I try to do as much organic.
It's the fear of the unknown,
as possible.
Right?
Although occasionally I'll pull out the Roundup.
Yeah,
if I just can't control something. But I prefer not to. So I think we have to recognize people's viewpoints on this, and
it's a public resource,
understanding.
Right?
It's a public resource. Yeah. Even though herbicide use is heavily regulated in forest environments, so there's buffers are maintained to prevent any entry of herbicides into water systems. So we're not. They're not trying their best not to contaminate water systems, and so there's a lot of areas that can't be treated with herbicides that are no-go areas that are left dealt with in other ways.
Yeah.
So so it's heavily regulated. But one of the issues we face, however, is that this grass, blue joint reed grass, its Latin name is Calamagrostis canadensis. There are no alternatives to controlling it that are really, really effective, other than the herbicide treatment. Except for growing spruce underneath aspen, because the aspen, having a fairly well-established aspen canopy, suppresses the grass as well. It's not a big problem when spruce is growing under the aspen.
Oh, okay. So the grass needs full sun as well.
Yeah, it prefers full sun.
Okay.
It does okay under partial shade, but
Gotcha.
it does best under full sun. You can get spruce overtopped by grass for 5 to 10 years, and that's not good for the spruce. The grass is dense and casts a lot of shade and everything else. So and it competes for water. With the spruce, dries the soil out, takes up all the nitrogen out of the soil, and so it's a problem. So in pure spruce plantations, it's one of the practices that is pretty common. Largely for that reason, as well as reducing the aspen competition if there is any. An alternative to herbicides, in that case, the pure spruce plantations would be aggressive ground disturbance using heavy equipment, big cats. They're big.
People don't like that either.
Big site disturbance equipment. No, and I don't either, because it's basically you can do a lot of damage to the soil if you have to do it very aggressively to really effectively control the grass. So
so you win some, you lose some.
You're going to. You run the risk of causing some damage to soil. You're running big, heavy diesel equipment. There's a risk of oil and diesel spills. There's all kinds of stuff.
Well, and seeding in invasives and stuff
and then,
too, right?
This equipment usually is not perfectly clean.
Yeah,
it's pretty hard to clean it. So you're moving clovers, all kinds of weeds around. And they're just blowing around. The seeds blowing around anyway, and that's an ideal situation.
So in a natural situation, like say a burn,
you
have a burn comes through and it burns out this mixedwood stand, right?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to relate this back to the Calamagrostis,
right?
Naturally speaking, so you burn it all out, and the first thing to come up is Calamagrostis. What would happen naturally? You know what I mean? Because you're saying this is a problem, so this has been a problem for.
It's
part of the natural
system,
succession, right?
So
Calamagrostis is not.
Well, I think the fire. It sets back Calamagrostis, I think, far more than it would set back in a harvest. After harvesting, after clear cut, the root system has not been disturbed.
The soil's pretty intact.
Root system, it's intact. So any grass that's there rapidly expands and takes over. It grows underground, has rhizomes.
Gotcha.
It spreads very quickly. So you can go from, I don't remember the reports. I think it's like 25% grass cover underneath the stand before harvesting to like 75% cover 3 years after.
Right. So
harvesting.
This is not a natural situation.
No, it's not a natural situation because the ground hasn't burned. So and the fire can burn down into the organic layer and surface, and it'll kill some of that grass. It certainly sets it back for a while. So I think fire helps to arrest it to some extent. There'll be patches where the fire didn't burn very intensely, didn't burn into the duff, where the grass will come up. But that's going to create the patchy conditions that are fairly natural in our natural forests, in our old forests.
Okay. What are the arguments?
So that it would be there.
Sure.
Yeah. So, but then the other thing is, the fire doesn't burn all the stems. The stems don't generally burn through. So over time, those trees fall over, and that creates some ground disturbance. That disturbs the soil because the root systems will turn up the soil. We have these things called root tips, right? Where the trees fallen over, the roots have pulled up the soil, and you get a bit of a mound of soil there. And it disturbs, the soil's all been disturbed. So here you got good seed bed for spruce and a place where the grass is going to take a little while.
So for people to visualize, some people, so we're talking when a fire comes through, it's not always clean. It's not burning 100%. It burns. They're mostly dirty burns for the most part. So
there's going to be a lot of. There's going to be a fair number of standing trees.
So when Phil's talking about the tipping over, you're talking about trees that are left standing, and they eventually die because there's no wind protection or anything. And when they blow over, they pull up a giant chunk of their root system with it, and they tip over kind of like a hinge, and then that pulls up, creating this big root ball that's above the ground. And if anyone's spent any time in the woods, they've seen this, right? And you've seen this giant depression with probably some water in it and some open soil, and that's what you're talking about, just for visual.
And the mound beside the depression where the roots were. So that's then a good place for spruce seed to land and germinate. So and the other thing to consider is that nature had no timelines for regenerating these areas. So if it took 50 years,
it didn't care about timber value.
Takes 100 years, then and some of these areas where we have spruce in the mixed woods, some of that spruce may not have been taken out in fires. It may be much older than we think it is. So it could be well over 150 years old. The timelines are pretty much infinite in nature.
Gotcha.
So we're not on a schedule.
No, it's different. As soon as you add timber value and wanting to pull, instead of burning that wood and sending the carbon into the atmosphere, we're capturing that wood, turning it into goods and services, and so we're doing a different thing with it.
And the nature, what's left on the way the ground is, the way the vegetation is slightly different after a harvest than fire, and the species are still all the same pretty much. There's very little change, but but the dynamics is a little bit different.
Okay. So what's the arguments? What are the arguments in your mind for transitioning away from our current system of regeneration into
which is harvest and plant and do what's necessary to make sure the spruce grows the way we want it to. Including possibly using herbicides. So the one of the alternatives is to use is to think about using natural regeneration. So so if we can regenerate white spruce effectively, then we can save a lot of money. Saving $500 to $1,000 a hectare fairly quickly.
Sure.
It's a giant capital if. So history, documentation, examination of the success of natural regeneration in Western forests up to through the 1970s. When it was pretty common for harvesting, to just harvested areas just to be left for natural regeneration. When they were examined in the 70s, it was discovered that the conifer, the spruce in particular, was disappearing. That the rates of natural regeneration were not consistently good. Right. There were places where it worked, where it was happening quite well, but lots of places where it wasn't, at least not within the time frame that was necessary to meet the calculated timber supply requirements, the expectations of spruce production in the forest. So if it was happening, it was happening too slowly. So why was that? And one of the reasons was that in the 60s and 70s, most cutblocks were fairly large. It wasn't unusual for them to be well over 50 hectares, sometimes a couple hundred hectares. So and they were clear cuts, so virtually every tree was taken out. A lot of the time, certainly in the 60s and 70s. Before that, more stuff was left behind.
So there was no seed source for the spruce, like you were saying earlier.
So there are big areas with seed trees a long ways away. So several hundred meters, maybe far more than that. So no seed source, no seeds to naturally regenerate white spruce. So so that's changed. Starting in the 90s, there's starting to be increasing interest in something called variable retention, which meant leaving trees in the harvested areas to reduce sight lines, provide hiding cover for wildlife, but also to maintain the natural structure and pieces, to create something that looked more like a fire in some ways, because fires, like I said a while ago, don't burn absolutely everything usually. Yeah. It's pretty rare that everything is gone. There's usually patches of green trees left after a fire.
Right.
So that's
we're approaching that mimicking fire situation.
So starting to mimic that. So the ecologists, sort of promoting that idea.
Yeah.
Several decades ago, and it's more or less it's become standard practice now to do that, and the government is trying to make sure that's done more. I think they either have just revised the requirements, or they're about to increase the basic amount of retention. But I know a lot of companies are retaining a lot more than the basic government requirements.
Oh yeah, they're knowledgeable about what they would like to see and what they think is good stewardship, right? And so they'll go above and beyond the minimum to make sure that that's there.
Yeah, that's right. And how much of that you need varies depending on your forest type. So if you're dealing in pine blocks in the foothills, the requirements are quite different, and it needs to think about what wildlife perhaps you're trying to help in that situation. So it depends on circumstances. So
a lot of values to think about.
A lot of values to think about and balance. So but one of the consequences of doing of the smaller cut blocks and this variable these retention patches in the mixed-wood forest is that now we start having seed sources of white spruce close to the areas that have been harvested, close to the clear-cut areas itself. So we're starting to see in clear-cut blocks more and more natural spruce regeneration.
Right.
And then it's variable. So so how to make that happen effectively is a challenge. What some studies have shown in areas where retention was practiced, there's a big study underway northwest of Peace River, a study called EMEND, emulating natural. It's a big project to look at trying to emulate natural disturbance processes.
Yeah, I had Ellen McDonald on early in, I don't know what episode, but earlier season.
So people can refer to that.
Talking about EMEND there. So if you want to hear about EMEND, go to that episode with Ellen McDonald, whatever number it is. I don't know, 20, 30, somewhere in there.
Okay. Cool. So one of Vic Leifer's graduate students and Vic looked at natural regeneration of white spruce there, and they found that there's variation in how much spruce there is across that study. They found that they found really good spruce regeneration when the trees were within about 60 meters of the area, and where there'd been some disturbance of the ground by equipment, usually yarding equipment, skidding equipment that had been used to pull the logs out of the forest. So a little bit of ground disturbance scuffed up the ground surface, created a good place for spruce seed to get established and grow into seedlings, set the grass back a little bit. And then having a seed source within about 60 meters of the areas is good. So kind of that morphed, that kind of you can kind of translate that into a suggestion that if you have at least 5 good big seed producing spruce trees per hectare, maybe even as few as 3, 60 meters, 120 meters apart, kind of morphs into about 3 trees. Or to get it well distributed, about 3 trees a hectare. 120 meters apart is less than 1 tree per hectare.
And the taller the better. The
taller the better. They need ideally they need to be taller than the aspen, so the spruce doesn't seem to produce much seed most times if it's shorter than any aspen that it might be growing with in those patches. So sounds simple, but there is a big wrinkle in this, and that you can't leave spruce standing by itself, or even in a patch of spruce inside a cut block, because their root systems are very shallow, and these soils can be wet in the spring quite often.
And they're used to existing
particularly
with
on
a
spruce
shelter
sites.
around them, right?
Yeah, they've grown up with the aspen and everything else around them, all the other trees around them. So you remove their buddies, you disrupt the root connections, and then they tend to fall over when there's a big wind.
Yeah,
usually, often in the spring, the big winds out of the west or northwest blow in, and strong winds, and you get lots of wind. We call it wind throw when trees blow over. So a couple of so disturbance, if it's just spruce, you got to be really, really careful of doing that and just leaving spruce trees standing. So there's been several decades ago, people tried this classical system called the seed tree system.
Sure.
That's been applied in other places, parts of the world, with white spruce in Alberta,
sure,
and in the western Boreal, and it didn't work very well because the spruce trees would fall over. If you left single spruce standing in the block, they just get blown over most times within a couple of years, unless you're very lucky and you have a soil that has enough rocks in it, and it's has a little bit better drainage, that it provides anchorage. So I think it's been tried and it's been successful in areas like around Hinton, where you've got rockier soils than you do in the north.
Gotcha.
And I've seen places in central Saskatchewan where it's worked quite nicely. So it's not so to get spruce to remain standing in these retention areas, and most of our mixedwood sites, certainly in Alberta, it's best if those spruce are surrounded by aspen. They're growing in with aspen. So if you leave a patch of aspen with some spruce in it, the aspen is reasonably wind firm. It's much sturdier against the wind than spruce. So it'll stay standing. So in that case, and that's what they found at the Emen site, was spruce sort of in patches, often with a bunch of aspen around it, with the spruce taller than the aspen, so it's getting a fair bit of sunlight. It's producing decent amounts of seed, and that starts to help.
Right.
So then you got seed. The next issue, to make spruce even more difficult to deal with, is it doesn't produce lots of seed every year. So it has a variable rate of seed production. So it can go anywhere from 2 to 10 years between producing reasonable amounts of seed.
Right.
It seems to hot, dry summers seem to stimulate seed production the next year. So that can help. So it kind of fits in with the weather and climate cycles. But spruce usually doesn't produce bumper crops of seed for a couple years after it produces a bumper crop. So it takes a couple of years off. Takes a break to regain some energy and produce seed. So you've got this timing thing that you have to deal with. Okay.
So would you say that most of the problem with trying to get from our current system to something more quote unquote natural, like a natural succession, would you say most of the difficulty in doing that stems from like the economic side of it? Like just literally, we want to try to have as many, continue to have as sturdy of a forestry industry and steady jobs into these small communities as possible. Is that the main problem, or do you think it's possible to get to a natural succession program that can sustain those jobs and the economy and that kind of stuff as well? Like, can we get both both birds at the same time kind of thing?
We don't. I haven't seen all the data. I don't think the data exists to figure this out. To the nth degree. But I think given that we have these aspen stands with spruce underneath them, we have these mixtures of aspen and spruce that are coming on. I think we have an opportunity, to work towards using a more natural approach.
Okay.
To capitalizing on the system more effectively. So it does involve some changes, and one of the first barriers is that the province has regulations that require effective regeneration within a 14-year period, 14 to 15 years after harvesting. So those spruce stands have to be regenerated. So do aspen stands, and so do pine stands. So you need trees. ideally over 30 centimeters tall.
Which makes sense on a surface level of we want to make sure that that forest is coming back because, you said in the past, we had problems with that. We were creating fields instead of forests, right?
Or poorer quality forests, So that's why those regulations came into place.
But they might be short-sighted.
It's kind of forced to be because you're then obligated to have roughly 30 centimeter tall spruce by age 14, which isn't going to happen with natural regeneration except under really ideal circumstances. So we're it's kind of forcing the industry to do this. It was well intentioned, well considered, but we need to fight if we're going to go there. The regulations have to change on this. We have to think of ways to allow this to happen. So so it can work. It's going to be much more variable, and lacking extensive data. It's hard to say what kind of short-term impacts that would have on timber supply, on how much spruce could be harvested.
Well, that's the thing, right?
So and if we could, I'm not sure whether we could achieve that without having to reduce the harvest rate in spruce. It partly depends on what's out there. It partly depends on what we have coming up as already mixed-wood stands and aspen stands with the smaller spruce in them, and how we can work with those going forward.
And this is not your expertise, but I'm going to ask you anyways, just because you're here. Do you think that there's room for that? Like, do you think that maybe we have over allocated timber supply? Like, obviously this is very anecdotal. This is just us talking. Obviously I'm not saying the answer to this, but in your opinion, do you think that we've over allocated? Do you think there's room, ecologically speaking, to dial that back a little bit? I mean, I understand that the consequences is less jobs and less. So, but
I don't think we have to, because we also have to think of other lands where we could actually grow spruce, and we could adopt an idea that's been around and keeps coming up every once in a while, called that triad approach. We manage a chunk of forests using,
I vaguely remember, but I forget.
using more natural approaches like this successional approach, and we put some aside, which we do to reserve as parkland and natural and just unharvested areas. But then we take some ground and we grow it almost like a crop. We grow it like a tree farm. We farm the trees.
Sure.
And I know some companies on private land. There are some private land operations where that is happening in a few places in Alberta. And by being close to roads, having good access, being on private land, often it's marginal agricultural land. You can grow spruce maybe on a 50-year rotation, and maybe suffer some reductions in quality. But
people don't like that though, right? Because it's the idea of taking something natural and messing with it,
farming it,
right? People don't like the word farming are trying to get away from, right? People want they want sustainable systems that are self-sustaining and don't require inputs, right? So
it's kind of like everything else, right? We can't have absolutely everything. So I think there's an opportunity to do that and to intensively manage spruce in some places, and to meet that need, and make sure also that we're producing plenty of aspen to meet the users of aspen fiber as well.
Do you think that aspen fiber is a concern in this? Like, I feel like it's
at present. No, I don't think so. I think we're underutilizing what's out there, and certainly the potential. The second growth forests seem to be are often quite vigorous, so I don't think we have a huge risk. Our risk is the impacts of climate change. If the forest land base, if the areas we can grow trees on shrinks, which we do expect to happen.
Right.
So there will be some areas where, certainly the aspen sites in the southern limits of the productive forest might shrink.
Right.
As well as some of the spruce forest.
That'll definitely have an impact on timber allocation anyways, right? The available fiber. So that climate change could create a situation
where we have to
rethink.
We have to rethink this.
How much we're cutting and stuff. That could happen.
Right? Yeah. And at this point, we don't have the ability really, or we're still really early in developing our ability to forecast what the implications are.
No, it's tough.
Change.
It's
really
real tough.
Yeah.
And it's hard to start planning silviculture around what the climate's gonna be like.
Yeah, that's right.
We don't know what's gonna happen. We can model
we can model some expected scenarios, but nature will probably hit us with some surprises.
I'm sure there'll be a couple.
So we have to be cautious in what scenario we look at, and usually the usual practice is to try 3 or 4 different scenarios.
Got to hedge our bets for sure.
Run 3 or 4 different scenarios, but we don't really. At this point, we really have limited capacity to model that. The models for predicting timber production for growth and yield really aren't out there. We've been talking about it in connection with the model I'm involved in. But, we have some ideas, but it'll be a few years before
for sure
do those kinds of things.
What do you think is this? Like culturally speaking, from a public perspective, at least anyways, there's this drive for more natural systems of everything, right? We want more permaculture style farming, right? People desire that, right? Yeah. Whether or not it's feasible or not, I don't know. That's not my, it seems cool. It would be awesome if we had that system. So they want a more natural system. They want to get away from herbicide. They want to get away from heavy machine, whatever, all these things, right? Yeah. And there's certain things I think that we can probably. So what do you think that drive is? That drive towards the natural. Why do we want that in our lives? Why do we see that as better than us, meddling in quotations, right?
in a managed system. I think we certainly in our in Western Canada, that's what we're surrounded with, and we see that nature has led to the things we see today. So it uses the natural systems. It doesn't push them too much.
Something holistic about it, right?
It's attractive. It just feels right, and the word natural carries just a great connotation. It's a feel good thing, I think.
Totally.
Largely. But it's going to be, we've got the opportunities to save some money, to make things less expensive, cut costs, or maybe that money can be used elsewhere, more effectively.
Sure.
And then we're hopefully in the process maintaining forests that look somewhat natural, that resemble what happened, what developed naturally.
So are we seeing problems? I don't know why I wanted to get to the philosophical side of it for a second there, but I just had that pop into my head. I was like, natural, right? Yeah, but getting back into the nitty gritty. So what are the problems with, how we do things currently, and like what are the perceived problems, I should say, right? I mean, I know this not silviculturally speaking. I mean more from a value perspective of like habitat or water quality or whatever, versus what could be gained by going towards a natural successional system. Like obviously natural successional system, we're going to be less productive from the conifer side of things, but what would be gained for giving up that? Yeah, well, by growing the mixture and maybe harvesting the aspen when it's at an appropriate time, there's maybe 60, 70, 80 years, when it's at its peak. And the aspen trees are good size. Then instead of leaving those there, which would happen naturally, to decay, to die and decay. They just fall over,
it contributes to the ecosystem, certainly. But,
it's part of the system,
it's part of the system, is what happened naturally. They often burned shortly thereafter. So you've got the opportunity actually to increase the total amount of fiber that you can grow on a hectare of land. By utilizing that aspen when it's at its peak, and then allowing the spruce, if there's enough spruce there to grow on to reach merchantable sizes, because at age 60 to 80, growing in a mixture, you're probably not going to have very much spruce that's big enough to harvest.
Right.
So you're going to leave it for 50, 60 years to grow further after you remove the aspen.
Okay.
You don't quite get as much spruce as you might if you grew it for 90 years in a pure spruce stand.
Right.
But there, so there's a little less. So the growth rate of the spruce itself is a little lower. But when you add up the spruce you can harvest at age 120 or so to the aspen you harvested at age 70, you get more total wood than you would if you grew aspen by itself and spruce by it. So
instead of just the plantations, you actually get more total volume.
You get more total volume.
Okay.
And you get the added advantage of growing the spruce underneath the aspen at the same time the aspen is growing. So it's slower, but it's growing. And it survives pretty well once it gets established. So there's advantages to establishing spruce underneath aspen early on at the beginning.
So like planting and stuff you're talking
even with planting. So having aspen around the spruce reduces some of the problems you can run into on some sites, not all sites. But
I don't think anybody has problems with planting, so I think we can continue to plant spruce. I don't think anyone's going to be
the problem is planting spruce in a clear cut. If you're on a site that's exposed, you can run into problems with winter desiccation injury, and it can hammer your spruce and cause elevated mortality of spruce. And we have frost problems on some sites too. So so
it's nice to have some kind of cover.
So having some aspen around is good, certainly during the first few years. Now, what a lot of companies do on those sites is they hold off on the herbicide treatments until the spruce until maybe 4 or 5 years after planting spruce, and by that time, you don't have the problems. These spruce are big enough that they can handle the winter.
So if we didn't go in and herbicide and we just left those planted spruce and that aspen, so the spruce has been planted, the aspen's coming up naturally. We know the spruce is going to grow slower if we don't spray it, but if we leave it that way, we could have more total wood in the end. But we're going to have less conifer, and more of it would be
where it's just we've got to grow the conifer over a longer period.
So that would change the system slightly, but if the wood's there, the jobs are still there, the economy's still there.
And the trick to sort of making it work, if we wanted to maintain the same, not reduce the amount of wood, the amount of spruce that's available for harvest, is to do it on enough sites and time it so that we can meet our spruce needs.
I guess we didn't explain this. We kind of you and I both know intuitively what we're talking about, but we didn't explain that this would require you to come in and remove the aspen at 80 years, like you said, 60 to 80 years first, while trying to avoid damaging the
spruce, that's the small spruce,
the established spruce, and then you'd come back another 60 to 80 years later when the spruce is matured and harvest again. So every cutblock wouldn't be a clear-cut system, really,
until you remove the spruce.
Until you got the spruce, and then you'd be back to the clear-cut system.
Then it would be a clear-cut.
So it'd be a two-pass system kind of in those cutblocks. So that's what we call understory protection, which has been what you've been researching for 20 years? 30 years?
About 20.
So we call that understory protection cutblocks, right?
And in the process, when the aspen is removed, some of the aspen is left behind. Because, if spruce are more than 5 meters or so tall, they need some protection from the wind. So even those small spruce will blow over if a big wind hits them. So aspen are left usually in strips on the block, and it's somewhere around 15 to 20% of the aspens left behind. So you got some big aspen left standing. So from a distance, the forest still has a fair bit of this height structure. You got big aspen and spruce ranging in size depending on what's there. You can have sometimes some pretty big spruce standing there. Sometimes those might be harvested at the same time as the aspen. And then by virtue of the disturbance you create in logging, there's got to be trails into the forest to access the timber and to remove the aspen. And those trails usually regenerate to small aspen after the aspen's harvested. So you get a mixed stand coming back, and maintaining a fairly mixed.
So you wouldn't plant those trails, those Not really.
Not really.
Just let them come back.
And we talked about it to people. I think it's been tried, but it doesn't. If you planted spruce, those spruce would not be big enough to be merchantable, to be harvested.
Yeah, you have to do understory protection again.
Yeah,
Third time around. Yeah.
Okay. So, and the possibility would be to morph into some different kind of silviculture program than we're used to.
For sure. Yeah.
So something that's sometimes called this selection kind of forestry, applying a selection system where we're just continuously coming back to the stands and taking a few trees out, which isn't on the cards right now.
Right.
Us. Yeah.
So from your perspective, this is a good way to move forward into this system, is the understory protection and that kind of.
Yeah, and it provides enough. Yeah, I think that. Yeah, we've got an opportunity to maintain a fair bit of spruce, given that we seem to have, as you said at the outset, a lot of aspen stands with spruce understories.
And we've seen examples of this. Like there's all kinds of studies that you've been involved with that show that doing this kind of a system has massive release for the spruce. So you know that the wood quality is there. This isn't just theoretical. Like you've proven this.
It's been proven. Several companies have been doing this for a couple of decades. So we see.
So what about
see really good spruce growth after the aspen's removed?
So now the next question, and a lot of people would say should have been the first question, but regarding the understory protection and stuff like that. So now what about the other values? We know that the wood is there, so we can support the economic activity.
Right.
What about the other values? The habitat, the water, the whatever, right? All that stuff, carbon sequestration, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
How does that tie back into the system? How does it change it?
Okay. It's probably one of the best ways we can sequester carbon in the system. We're maintaining a good amount of forest cover for 120 to 140 years in the system. So we're utilizing the aspen instead of allowing it to die and fall over.
Sure, that's a lot of carbon
some additional benefit. Yeah, there's carbon released when that stuff dies and decays. So instead, we're putting that in. That is going into wood products. So some of it's going into
and
paper.
Then it goes into the dump later, so it never sees the light of day ever again. Just kidding.
A good chunk of it's going into paper. Yeah. That's not really, doesn't really have a big carbon benefit really, because it's released back to the atmosphere.
But the point is the carbon's captured for
we're capturing,
time.
If we're putting it into OSB or MDF, fiberboard or chipboard, that's carbon storage. That's long-term carbon storage for at least many decades before it ends up in a dump and ends up producing,
which is inevitable.
Producing methane.
But they capture that, so
if they we might need it someday. So from a carbon budget point of view, probably some gain over the more traditional systems, although it's probably pretty small in the grand scheme of things.
Right?
So the trick is really, in terms of carbon, is to maintain forest cover and to make sure harvested forests are regenerated by some way or means. And that achieves most of it. We need to find ways to reserve or maintain soil carbon, dead wood on the ground and stuff like that. So and that kind of segues into habitat. So the natural forest, the habitat is quite diverse. I already mentioned that we got a couple or more tree species, aspen and spruce. We've got trees of different heights in the forest, but also we have dead trees standing, partially dead trees standing that provide habitat for insects and wildlife. Things like woodpeckers. It
creates a lot of edge if you do it this way.
Yeah,
right?
Lots of edge, which is ideal for a lot of species. But we also then, if you've got closed forest canopies, then you've got these interior forest conditions that are ideal for certain species that need interior forest conditions. You got big trees that have lichens on the branches that are coming down to the ground when the snow breaks branches off, and important for food source for deer and caribou and things like that. and the dead wood on the ground provides lots of habitat for rodents and insects. And stuff. So a diversity of insects and spiders in the canopies.
Is there research being done to measure the amount of biodiversity in an understory protection situation versus our historical regeneration and compared to fire? Like, I mean, EMEN's kind of that.
That's the focus of EMEN, and I'm not sure how much. I don't think there's a lot of that happening in other areas, but
okay.
I'm not sure.
It's a complicated one, but it seems
it's a complicated one, but so at least in my view, kind of maintaining the major components, creating the structure, creating something that is similar to the natural system helps to preserve the natural diversity. So
would you say it does that better than our historical regeneration method?
I think it does. So at least at the scale that we might want to that we could be applying this historical clear-cut plant spruce system.
That makes sense.
So the pure spruce system could be highly simplified if we go to the extreme.
Right. Yeah. If you have a pure a total canopy of spruce, there's not a lot going on underneath. It's
right. It just doesn't have that diversity.
Yeah.
And it's been harvested. Yeah. The dead wood isn't being replenished any dead wood that was left behind. As it decays, it disappears.
And I mean, to be clear, those stands do happen in nature, but they're generally in riparian areas close to to a creek
or close to a lake, or
they're just along the edge.
And areas that happen to burn suitably, had a seed source and of spruce around them, and burned at the right time too. They're kind of late. They're usually late summer burns with the spruce around, providing a seed crop right away within weeks after the fire. So there's kind of those. Pure spruce stands are kind of ideal situations. And there's other things that happen to create pure spruce stands. I ran across one really interesting one with a beaver.
Oh,
near a beaver pond.
Sure,
we're harvesting the aspen. I just was out in this area and saw over a little 100 meters away a little patch of small pure spruce in an area that was otherwise 30-year-old aspen with some spruce underneath it.
Oh, okay.
What's been going on over there? So who came all the way back here to do some silviculture?
Oh, so the beaver was cutting the aspen.
I went over there and 20, 30 meters around the pond, the aspen had all been removed.
So the beaver was doing
silviculture,
the understory protection. That's incredible.
It was doing silviculture for us. So
I never. I guess they always take decisions. You don't often see them take.
They don't often eat spruce. They will. They will sometimes, but I don't know.
I never even thought about that, but that makes total sense.
After I saw it, I thought, wow, okay, So that another contributor. So when you're close to water or riparian areas, you might
that's what's going on.
Have beavers around. It's also the fact that aspen doesn't like the wetter ground. It doesn't do so well, and spruce does better. Can do okay on the wetter ground. So it's kind of the site conditions as well as other things. Is probably the nature of the fire. Close to water, close to lakes. Maybe also how much spruce seed source there was. Because it's wetter, it didn't burn to the same extent, or maybe it didn't. Maybe it's been a long time since it burned. So a whole lot of factors that can create those areas.
It sounds like it might be.
So we need some pure spruce stands too. They're a part of the landscape, and we need to.
This is changing the system slowly over time, and just changing those mixed wood stands, and then but of course you're still going to have clear cuts. You're still going to have pure aspen stands that get cut sometimes, and they're going to come back as pure aspen. You might have pure pine, same thing.
Or maybe they were. And sort of the other thing we have to think about is what it was isn't necessarily what it has to be going into the future. So we don't have to keep a pure aspen stand as a pure aspen stand all the time. So if it's a site. If soil conditions are appropriate for growing spruce there, we might be happy converting it to a mixed wood stand. That might,
that would be the natural succession, right?
Quite fine. Yeah, if there was any spruce seed source nearby.
Right.
There's some of these areas with pure aspen. One of the reasons they are pure aspen is there's very little spruce.
They're good for aspen.
It was maybe as a really intense fire that really did take out all the spruce, or and maybe repeated fires over centuries, have reduced the spruce seed source in the area. So there's no spruce seed. So it remains an aspen stand, or maybe the sites are a little too dry.
Well, that's just it, right? Like historically, the reason we had those trees, we made those trees grow there is because that's where those trees grow. It wasn't like we were deciding, we're going to put this here, this here, this here. It's like, no, we're just doing what would. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What is capable of growing?
There's a long history here, and we also have to remember the impacts of humans. That came home to me one day when I was reading some family history material. My great grandfather settled just north of the city here in a community called River Kabar, and then they wrote about all the removing those big spruce to break the land. To start growing crops. So it was and it's not a place you don't see spruce around it. It's hard to believe that it was once a spruce forest, largely probably spruce and mixed wood forest.
Because now you go to River Kabar,
it's all agricultural.
It's all agricultural
farmland.
It's field,
until you get there's some wet ground that was left. So and then you go north, Slave Lake country. You head up into some of those areas where settlement came in the mid to late 1800s. And you see along the road sometimes you can find spruce stumps in what are aspen stands. The people went along and as the country was being settled, people didn't use aspen much for building barns and sheds and houses. They were taking the spruce out and milling it. So selective removal of spruce through the landscape has had an impact on what we see today, as well as land clearing and the abandonment of farmland that then regenerates. And aspen is better at getting established there because in that case, seed might blow in and it can from several kilometers away. So, So it's good at regenerating on formerly cultivated land sometimes, or maybe there were patches of aspen left behind that provided root systems that regenerated. So we've the landscape we're dealing with until you get into remote parts of Alberta, beyond the edges of the farm, the developed farming area. We can see the touch of humans.
We've had a lot of impact for sure.
Yeah, and then we have become decently successful at controlling wildfire. So the natural disturbance
another big impact.
Been disrupted, even though sometimes some years we can't stop it.
It's catching back up to us.
For many reasons. That can be a topic. I think a good topic for another podcast with somebody in the fire.
It's definitely been an ongoing. It's come up a couple times. It's something that I probably say pretty often. Just bring it up.
Right. How do we deal with this in the future? And avoid the California situation if we can.
Totally. Exactly.
So again, having the mixed forest is ideal. I already mentioned that the spruce stands can go up in flames very, very quickly if they have trees of different sizes in them. There's good ladder fuels. The needle litter on the ground is very, very combustible. So we need to think carefully about the extent, the size of pure spruce areas, and mixed woods are good. We know aspen does burn, but it takes certain particular circumstances to get aspen to burn.
Right. But the opposite is true of the conifer burns and aspen doesn't burn as hot. But we also don't want to start converting everything to aspen just to be fire suppressant, right? Because you're missing.
Well, we're gonna
all
lose
the other values
all
get
the
sacrificed.
other values that are gone, and a forest industry based on conifer sawmills.
And managing a land out of fear of fire doesn't seem like an effective way to do anything.
No, and it reduces our resilience, or the resilience of the forest to future changes, climate change and economic changes and other things. So I think we need to do what we can. to try to maintain the forest.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Totally.
The natural ecosystems to the best we can, recognizing that climate is changing and lots of stuff is changing. And we
lots of challenges.
Can work towards.
Yeah. It's an infinite number of challenges. Like right now we're talking about trying to get into a natural succession method of doing forest regeneration because we're interested in it, not because we have to do it, but because we want to try to get to a more natural way of doing things, just because we know, holistically speaking, that that's probably where we should go, right? We know that when we start, nature has it figured out. Let's try to copy that as much as possible, and we'll probably be in a good place. It's a good place to start.
Good place to start. Yeah, it's a good model to follow. Yeah, it's been operating for a few thousand years.
A few thousand, yeah. So it seems like ecologically speaking, doing like understory protection and that kind of stuff is a net positive. Like it's going to be good for that, and even for a wood supply situation, it's a net positive. Economically, actually, I was just thinking having a more intensive harvesting system of, instead of clear cutting, I imagine doing the strip cuts or avoidance, however you're avoiding the understory. Okay. Yeah. Is that much more cost intensive than just doing a clear cut, or does that balance out over time, over the course of the second pass and that kind of stuff? I know again, that's not your area of expertise, but
I think given the additional total yields, I think it probably comes close to paying off. So there are additional costs because there's planning and layout costs to doing that removal of the aspen. So it usually costs a little bit more. I'm trying to remember the numbers in my aging brain. I think what is it? Something like $5 a cubic meter.
More. Okay.
More. Sometimes,
which is what's the
some companies have suggested it doesn't cost anymore. I don't always believe that. I think there is some extra cost,
but it can be done, and it can be feasible, done wisely.
It's not an enormous cost,
right?
It does eat into the eat into the financial returns, but it can be done. It's not onerous. So
and if it makes
it pays, it more than pays back. Like if you're not having to plant trees, if you're not planting spruce, it very quickly overcomes that $500 to $1,000 a hectare that you pay for planting spruce and establishing spruce in a clear cut situation. So one other alternative we haven't mentioned is a possibility to plant spruce underneath more or less pure aspen stands. If we don't have the spruce in the understory, it has to be done, somewhere around when the aspen's 40 to 50 years old.
Okay,
it it has been done and can be done. It's not without issues.
Right.
The big one is that the snowshoe hare
will
sometimes browse your spruce, and they can kill. They effectively kill them because they eat the tops off them. Repeatedly. In the winter.
So we need more coyotes, is what you're saying. Just kidding.
Yeah, you need a decent number of coyotes, and good owl have a good hunting ground for owls. So you could plant them. It's a little tricky to have them big enough when the aspen's ready to harvest. The timing of that has to be worked out. But it's been done.
That's interesting, though.
People have tried it.
So there's ways to think outside the box of what we're doing.
So if you didn't get the natural spruce regeneration happen, you could at some point, age 30, 40, 50, come in and plant spruce, get it there. And maybe there's some other options. If we have spruce seed, maybe we could apply spruce seed.
Literally just seed it.
Seed it. Yeah. And in the understory of an aspen stand, you probably need to do a little bit of ground disturbance to create places where seed would germinate and spruce trees would grow. So that's possible. I recall an experiment somebody did near Lac-La-Biche in the early 90s, where they tried it, and it did kind of work. There were, again, some things that...
I imagine the challenge there would be you walked through a 40-year-old aspen stand, and there's so much there's so much competition going on with the aspen that you have so much deadfall on the ground that it's like trying to create a ground disturbance would be problematic.
Yeah, it can be. Well, some stands are actually quite nice. The understory is not that bad. The canopy is open. The reason to go at 40 rather than 20 is that the canopy is at its densest at about age 20 to 25.
Hard to walk
through.
Then
as time goes by, they have, because they're shade intolerant, the bigger aspen win out over the smaller aspen. So a lot of those smaller trees fall out, die. They fall to the ground. And they're there. So but some stands that are that age would be quite straightforward to plant. There's enough plant space to go in and do. And if you ran a little bobcat or something through the forest to screef some ground, create some good places for spruce regeneration from seed. You could even seed. Even a quad with some kind of ground disturbance attachment.
Makes enough of a disturbance.
Little mini mounder or something, and a cedar attached to it. And there are
it's a good job for a summer student.
There are site prep equipment that's been used in Alberta, more in the foothills. I heard about a few years ago, which had seed applicators.
So just something
a scarifier.
You attach it to the quad and just drag it. Well,
this was on what was it? It was running behind a scarification machine. Oh, okay. They had a cedar attached to a mount. They've had them attached to mounders and to ground scarifiers.
Huh. There's lots of different options to do it.
There's ways to make it happen. One of the tricks of that study from the 90s showed that you can't drop seed on disturbed ground in little depressions. As the aspen leaves actually tend to collect in low-lying ground, and you get a couple of centimeters of dead aspen leaves. It'll just smother a small spruce seedling, and they disappear.
Gotcha.
And I guess the issue with seeding.
So many challenges for a little spruce seedling.
Yeah, the issue with seeding, as well as for natural regeneration, is that the squirrels and other rodents, and even the birds, eat a lot of spruce seeds. So
there's a lot of challenges.
That could be a problem sometimes. So it's not without its challenges. So
personally, I see
ways to make it happen, I think.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, and patience. I think patience and time. And
I think foresters are pretty good at that. 80 to 120 year return on investment.
People plant spruce trees that they know they won't see in their lifetime, right?
So I'd say
unless you live where I live now, so I can see Douglas fir trees that I remember being planted, and actually I go out into some areas, of my research sites on the coast.
The coast is kind of an unfair situation.
That I planted 25 years ago. They're getting to a nice size. Things grow faster and warmer climates.
I mean, from my perspective, it seems like the industry is heading this direction naturally.
Mm-hmm. I think so.
I mean, it's not there yet, but there's certain mills that are doing a lot of this. Some are doing none, but some.
Certainly they're doing the understory protection to take advantage of those situations where we have spruce underneath aspen. So that's going to provide future spruce in the future.
Do you think this will be the way of the future?
Stands, so we're doing that. It's about the next step that it has to go, and I haven't really got a sense that many people are thinking of this is creating situations where we recreate those stands with the spruce understories going into the future. So we do need to be thinking consciously about how we do that. And how we do that effectively. So,
right.
It could be natural regeneration. It could be just planting the spruce, but recognizing the expense of doing that. But creating the situations where we will be able to come back and do the understory protection again.
That makes sense. I just had a weird vision of some kind of like certification where it's like we're herbicide free or whatever, right? And you charge a premium for the herbicide free wood, right? And it's because your whole management area is herbicide free or whatever. And who knows? But there might be a market for something like that, right?
Well, some certification schemes have really encouraged.
Well, people are paying a lot of money for grass-fed beef and for locally produce eggs and everything else. So I think there's probably a market for, you know, I mean, we have certification in Canada, and we're highly certified, and everything's very sustainable. Yeah, but there's levels to it, right?
Yeah, the Forest Service FSC certification does ask that you minimize herbicide use. So that
they do.
You're working towards reducing herbicide use. Yeah. So early on, they didn't want herbicide use, but in order to, they've eased up. As they came into Canada, they recognized I think it was recognized there was some need for herbicide use, so they backed away from no herbicides to say that if we will accept some herbicide use, but you've got to be planning to minimize and hope trying to reduce your herbicide use. Keep it within reason.
And again, that's a fear one, right? It's like we're worried. We don't know something might happen. It's not really.
It's not really founded on. There's no solid science that says herbicides are destructive.
Not glyphosate.
Not glyphosate. Anyways. There's some industrial products we wouldn't want to see used.
We all know about DDT, and that was a mistake.
That was a mistake. That was a mistake. Certainly, testing is, despite the fact that some people don't think it's enough, testing is far more rigorous than it was in those days.
But like you said, if the public
and transparency are far greater. So
totally,
it's not without problem. So
and like you said, the public, if the public wants something to happen, it's a public resource, and we have to do as they request, right? So, I could totally see there being a market, like a premium paid for if there was a good campaign, like a marketing campaign, being like our wood is like kind of like A&W does with their beef, right? No antibiotics, no bullshit or whatever they say. You could do the same thing for wood, right? Where it would be, even though we're already at this standard,
produced in a natural forest.
We could do it. We could get even more certified, more, you know what I mean? If that's something that's desired. And I could totally see that. I mean, the market's not going to be, it's not going to be as big as, I mean, obviously if you're building a house, you're probably not going to do that, but there will be people who want something like that, right? So I would say there is a market.
There are people,
especially out your way, Vancouver, Victoria area, right?
Where green thumbs. Where the Greens got elected. It's greener NDP where I live.
It's an interesting concept, and it's although I'm very proud of like the forest industry and what we've managed to do and the strides we take and the individual people that force that. I think there's always room to improve and get better. Right.
And look for newer, better ways to do things. It doesn't mean we should never go after one thing exclusively. We need to have a range of options available. So even including the herbicide option, it's still really, really important in those situations where we want to or are, because of the site or other conditions, growing a pure spruce stand, or certain other situations we might want to. And it's a valuable tool. We don't want to lose it. And the message I've said to students and to foresters when I get the chance is that we've got to show responsible use. And most people are very responsible. So the process, there's a process for using herbicides. So it begins with evaluating whether it's necessary in a block, and it's for foresters going out in the block or at least flying over the block who know the area. Making a determination of whether it's necessary. So they don't want to waste money.
It's not the first tool.
Don't want to do things that they don't have to do. So,
exactly.
So that happens, and then there's all the regulation of the use of herbicides to prevent it going places where we don't want it to go, and that's pretty stringently dealt with. It's well controlled. They people, the commercial applicators know their business. They're professionals, and they don't want to lose their business. And they don't want to cause any damage to anything else. So, and
just ethically, they probably don't want that shit on their conscience, right? Like they want to be able to know that at the end of the day, they did something good for society and for the world and for the ecology. And They want, you know what I mean? People want to do good things.
They want to do good things generally. I think across the industry here, I think we're in a really good situation. Most people in the forest and related industries, even the herbicide applicators, people are spending a lot of time outdoors.
Yeah.
We developed an appreciation for the outdoors. So we want that, right? We don't want to see it destroyed or damaged. So
totally.
Yeah.
So you got any final words of wisdom? Anything you want practitioners to know, or anything to wrap up this idea and kind of solidify it in people's minds?
Yeah, I think people, the practitioners, foresters need to think about this the possibility of getting more natural regeneration out there, finding opportunities to use natural regeneration and natural processes. It has a nice appeal, lots of appeal to it. Could save money, and could help us help to continue maintaining natural systems, but also recognizing that there still is a place for plantations and plantation management, and there'll be a need for those going forward. We just need to think about how we're just put some thought into how we're doing that, and how we're using it, and make the best use of resources. And
think outside the box.
Yeah,
just because we do something a certain way doesn't mean we have to continue doing it that way. That's right.
Yeah, and we may be forced. We maybe need to think about it before we're forced to change. Yeah. Forced to think about it, or forced to abandon.
Yeah. People say practices. Tradition, right? Like, tradition is just peer pressure from dead people. It's useless.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Just because you did something is no reason to continue doing it.
That's right. Yeah, and it might.
If you can find a different way to do things that you think is pragmatic and makes sense, and it's good for multiple values, then I say go for it.
Then we should be trying it.
Yeah. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that was a very comprehensive. I mean, I know you, and I know your brain. You probably could have done this for 30 hours straight, explaining every minute detail of everything. I'm sure you're just itching to get the rest of it out. But
those 45-minute lectures that turned into an hour and a half, 3 days a week.
What do you do, right? Like, you're passionate about it. That's the whole point. It's good.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I hope this makes sense to people. So there's lots of places where there's lots of reading possibilities out there. There's lots of ideas around.
How many papers have you written on this type of subjects?
There's mine, and there's several of my colleagues. Vic Leifers from the U of A, also recently semi-retired. Has written some really, really neat papers on more natural approaches to mixed wood and spruce forest management.
There's a lot of research on this kind of stuff. A lot. In the States, there's some. And it's all over the place. So it's a lot to be read up.
In fact, I think the published literature on understory protection comes from Oregon.
Oh, okay.
The first paper I've ever seen published on it, the focused on it anyway, was there
you go. But it's everywhere.
Oregon forest. So but then the idea caught on here. So
this is awesome.
It's been well developed. So
I'm glad it did. I'm interested to see how everything works out, right? Especially I think especially from those more difficult to measure values, like like a traditional use from indigenous peoples, like habitat, to all the the little things that are hard to measure that we're trying to figure out, biodiversity,
trying to maintain.
So I'm interested to see how it all plays out. It seems good, and I'm excited to see it move forward.
If we can support multiple values on the land base, the more the better.
Totally. This is awesome. Thanks, Phil.
Okay, you're very welcome.
I appreciate it. Thanks a lot for listening, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I know Phil is just full of knowledge and ready to spew it all out. He's got so much to say, the details of which are probably killing him right now. So that was a quick run through of successional regeneration and kind of how we can start to think a little differently about growing back our forest. I hope you guys liked it. I know I love talking to Phil. He really, really, really knows his stuff. Very detailed. And to try to get him to not say everything he knows is difficult because he wants to get it out. He doesn't want to be misunderstood. And I love it. He knows a lot. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure to rate and review, all that good stuff. Really, really helps me out a lot. I appreciate it. And Take it easy. We'll see you next time.